The 2020 race has been like none we have ever seen in the past. Record turnout, a global pandemic, and the first female vice president-elect in history are just some of the things that is setting this particular election apart. For more, we want to bring in historian Amity Shlaes. She is also the author of Great Society, A New History. Amity, thank you for joining us. Let's go ahead and start with Kamala Harris. As vice president, she will be the first woman elected to that office, the second highest in the country. That's a big glass ceiling. Does it really change things when you are looking at American history and progress?
I don't think so. I think the progress was already happening. It's not that surprising, though it's very exciting that we elected a woman to such an office. It's been a long time coming. But in the course of history, it's a progression in terms of our widening our democracy, isn't it?
It is important, I think, for people when we were talking about representation, for sure. So after Barack Obama was elected, there was a lot of talk about changing attitudes towards race in this country. There was also, however, a backlash to those changing attitudes. Do you see Harris's election sparking similar reaction, either in terms of race or in terms of gender politics in our country?
I'm going to say something controversial and say when you look at U.S. history, it's less about race and gender than we think. The controversial part is when the politician lives on the identity instead of representing the whole country. That's very important. For example, Kamala Harris is wonderful, and all women are glad to see a woman in this office, but we know that she will represent all Americans. I'm thinking here, because I'm a historian, of Charles Curtis, who was the vice president in the end of the 20s, and it was a Native American. And he was a Native American, but he was also a lot of other things, a politician from Kansas. He happened to be a Republican, a fellow who wanted more rights for Native Americans, all that, but also rights for other Americans. And you know, we count on Kamala Harris to be the same thing, vice president to us all, and I think she will be.
Well, we've seen some historic elections just in our short time on this earth. Barack Obama, the first African-American president. Hillary Clinton, the first female nominee from a major party. John Kennedy was the first Catholic president. That's reaching a little bit back beyond my time. But I'm wondering, as you look at all these historic firsts, where do you think this election will rank?
Oh, this election is exciting because it's a revival of our polity. Just the turnout alone is exciting. And you can say a revival of our democracy, can't you? People really cared about how they voted, and they voted very thoughtfully. A second point about this election that's very heartening is it's actually kind of down the middle. It has been advertised as an incredibly divisive and divided election. But in fact, what you get is, you know, one president set aside, but Congress hasn't changed so much. There wasn't a giant blue wave. There was straight down the middle. Many Republicans were reelected. Take, for example, I'll give an example of what I'm speaking about. In Maine, in the first congressional district, President Trump won the electoral vote, but he didn't win the congressional seat. A Democrat won that. That's very American and very nice to see. People participated, and they participated vigorously. Not everyone likes all the outcomes, but it wasn't an outrageous, creepy, change the world election, as it turned out in the result. And that might have been a surprise relative to the way it was played in the media and in the consciousness before the day came to count the votes.
You know, Amity, it's interesting listening to you speak about this election, saying that it was heartening, that it was so down the middle, and calling it a revival of American democracy because so many people showed up to vote. When, as you acknowledge, for a lot of people, they've been viewing it through an entirely different lens, one in which questions about the future survival of our democracy have been bandied about. So I'm wondering, this chapter in history has not been completed yet. We are still looking at President Trump and how he intends to respond to this news. We have heard previously that he did not plan on giving a concession speech, that he does not plan on conceding, in fact, this election, but will continue to fight it. Tell us about what that would mean in history, and give us some perspective if that sort of thing has ever happened before.
I don't know about that particular thing, but I do know that elections have been furious and hot in the past, and perhaps it's because I work in history that I see this in a bigger perspective. An example, the Democratic National Convention in 1924, where they went to over 100 ballots and nearly expired from the heat, divided over their candidate. They ended up with John W. Davis. The Ku Klux Klan divided them. They thought their future as a party might not exist. It turned out the Democrats did pretty well, especially in the 1930s, where they ran the country. So that came to mind, and Curtis came to mind, and the entire period, we've had a lot of ruction before. Calvin Coolidge, I'm the biographer of Coolidge, was roundly hated and vilified as the ultimate in the decline of our republic or democracy. And it turned out people came to like him, or some did. President Obama was elected, and I don't think his presidency turned out to be too much about race. He himself, when he campaigned, didn't campaign too much on race. He campaigned generally. So I think what I'm saying is I think this election is much more normal than everyone's made it out to be. And the voters kind of said that, which I find heartening.
A normal election. That is a interesting and different perspective for sure.
And advertise. Let's just say that Americans fight a lot about politics, and they also vote very thoughtfully. It wasn't one side versus the other. You can look into the election, the big turnout of Kennedy, and the election corruption there in Illinois. Which is still being investigated to this day. Did Kennedy steal the election from Nixon in 1960? Perhaps. Do some of us love Kennedy? Certainly we love certain things about him, and we regret his assassination. History the point is bumpier than we think of it as having been. It's smoothed over in our minds, but when you go back and see it, that was an incredibly hot election, 60. And, it gives you context, and it makes you understand that there's more hope for our polity than some people are saying.
All right, Amity, so you've sort of framed your optimistic perspective of this election. When it comes to the place that Donald Trump will occupy in history, any thoughts about how history may regard that president?
I think one thing when you observe it is that Americans are currently liking outsiders, and President Trump was definitely an outsider. That suggests Americans are disappointed with the House and Senate and the executive branch. So that's not going to go away. It may be expressed in another form, but that's not going to go away. President Trump was elected because he was an outsider, not because he was a Republican the first time. The affection for outsiders, the sense that something else has to happen is there as well. Also, I think you can see that Americans are fickle about outsiders. They elect one, then they apparently de-elect him. They'll cycle through outsiders, but the impulse to bring in someone from outside abides.
All right, Amity, and for our viewers who are watching, there is a lot of robust excitement, perhaps to your point, as we're seeing, it looks like a snail car in San Francisco that is blowing fire out through its antennae. But to your point, Amity, there is a lot of voter participation. There is a lot of people who are excited about the democratic process that have come out to vote and are, in many cases, celebrating now. Amity Shlaes, thank you.
Say this day is happier than some preceding days for many people.
Absolutely. A release button for us all.